Join the nightly conversation. America at Night with McGraw Milhaven.
All right, it's Thursday night, and we go on the road every Thursday night. We check in with Bill Cleveland, who was our traveling correspondent here at America at Night. Bill Cleveland, welcome back to the show, my friend.
I can't believe it's already been a week. I mean, I guess people, they say when you get older, time, flies. And I remember as a kid hearing that, thinking, your parents say that, and you're like, you don't know what you're talking about. And now the older I get, it is absolutely true. I cannot believe it's already been a week since we've chatted.
It's amazing when you're 10, you're like, man, I'm 10, I'm old. That's a long time. And then you turn 50 and you're like, where did the last 10 years go? I thought I was 40. What happened to... Yeah, no, you're right. It's a thing.
It is wild.
All right, what are we talking about tonight? Where have you been?
Well, I was just chatting with your producer, Alex, and we were talking about the Muppets. And I'm a huge Jim Henson fan, and I thought I'd just mention this tonight. In the news in the last few months, the Jim Henson Company, they were located in Los Angeles, inside the old Charlie Chaplin studios, if you happen to know where that is. And they were there for, 20 years, 30 years. They were there a long time. And they have this gigantic Kermit the Frog that was on top of the building. And it was made to emulate Charlie Chaplin. He was in a tuxedo and everything. And when news broke that they had sold the studio and they were moving, kind of, one of the big stories around Los Angeles, because I was there when this was going down, was, what's going to happen to Kermit the Frog? Where's the giant Kermit going? Because it was a pretty gigantic statue. It sat on top of this building and was there for many years. Well, it turns out it's going to a place called the Center for Puppetry Arts, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. And so that's what I'm going to kind of talk about tonight, are a handful of places where people can go, especially if you grew up watching and loving the Muppets, maybe, the Muppet Show, loved the Muppet Show. If you or your kids watched, Sesame Street growing up, there are actually a few places around the country that you can go and visit and see these puppets in person, which to some people listening, you're rolling your eyes and you're thinking, why on earth would you want to go and see a puppet? But if you grew up with these things, I'll give you a great example. I went to the Center for Puppetry Arts. I've been there a few times. It's a wonderful museum. It's in Atlanta. And it's all about the role of puppets in popular culture. So movies and television, theater, stuff like that. And it's an amazing building. Some really great exhibits and artifacts. And so Jim Henson was instrumental in getting this museum built when he was alive. He was there at the ribbon cutting with Kermit the Frog. They cut the ribbon and everything. and when Henson died, his family donated, I want to say it's about 500 pieces of just stuff that Henson owned. So we're talking Muppets, actual puppets. We're talking his office, like his original office, and his workshop where he used to build these puppets and things, and boxes. I mean, all kinds of stuff. Donated them to the Center for Puppetry Arts. So the first time that I went there, I was interviewing one of the curators, and we're talking, and I said, kind of joking, I said, do you see grown men like me here in the middle of this exhibit, just kind of looking around, or is this kind of a weird thing? And she said, I have to be completely honest with you. She goes, I have seen both men and women standing in here and just completely in awe, even crying, because it reminds them so much of their childhood. And when you're standing next to Big Bird, I mean, you're looking at this thing, and it is unbelievable. So yeah, Center for Puppetry Arts. And I'll stop there because I'm sure you want to say something.
I have a couple of questions. Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta.
That's one of them.
Yes, sir. First off, you said that because this is actually very important. You mentioned Muppets and you mentioned Sesame Street. The Muppets
Yep.
are the Muppets. The Sesame Street puppets aren't Muppets. There was only one crossover, and that was Kermit the Frog.
That is correct. But they were Jim Henson creations, and so in this collection, you have a mixture of both. So you have, I can't believe I know all this. Just remember, last week I knew all about presidents, so I can multitask. I can know a lot of stuff. So you have Big Bird, of course, and then they had the Cookie Monster and the Count and all these characters from Sesame Street. But then around the corner, they've got from the oh my gosh, what was the name of their band? The Dr. Teeth band. I can't remember what the heck they called themselves. An Animal, and all these characters that you would remember if you watched the Muppet Show in the late 70s and into the early 80s. And it really is fascinating to see this stuff in person. And again, so there's three spots for people who are fans, and you really want to see some of this stuff,
Okay.
I would call TV and film, history,
Okay.
whatever. And the Center for Puppetry Arts, they've got the biggest of the collection.
All right, that's one. There are two more. What's number two?
So the other place is in New York City, and it's called the Museum of the Moving Image. And I remember this place distinctly because it was the very first time I got lost on a New York City subway. And if you've never had that experience where you duck out of the subway and you go, oh my God, where am I? One of those deals. So that was my first experience of getting lost on a subway. But yeah, it's a really cool museum. It really dives into a lot of film history and stuff. But they have another section of Jim Henson's collection or part of that collection, and some things that maybe the Center for Puppetry Arts that they don't have. So they had things like, if you remember, the old guys who were up in the balcony, Statler and Waldorf were their names. Both named after famous New York hotels. They're there. You got the Swedish Chef was there. But then they also have things like, if you can think, I don't know, did you watch the Muppet Show when you were a kid?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. The Sesame Street saved me because my mother, I was a terror of a kid. And then one day I was in front of the television watching Sesame Street, and my sisters were going to change the channel, and they were, don't touch that channel. He's sitting quiet for a minute. So I was huge Sesame Street, and then, of course, everybody watched the Muppets.
Yeah. So then you've watched the show. So like one of the things that they have on display when you watch the Muppet Show, the very first scene was this gigantic sign that came down from the ceiling in front of the big red curtains, and it says the Muppet Show, and Kermit or one of the guys, they pop their head through the thing. Well, they have that on display, which is pretty cool to see if you were a fan. But also, cue cards and scripts and different things that Henson and that team would use, for notes and to keep track of certain characters or who was going to play what. And to me, one of the coolest things to see were these archived photographs of them doing that show. And so to see them all looking down at monitors while they have their hands up in the air, all right, and they're doing the puppets and they're doing all this and that. I mean, these people were very, very talented that did this show. And so Museum of the Moving Image, that's the second one, and they've got the second most stuff.
All right. Where is the Museum of the Moving Image? You don't know because you were lost on a subway.
So I was lost in New York City. So it's in one of the boroughs, and I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head. But it is in New York City.
Were you planning on going there, or did you get lost in the subway and look up and say, "Oh, hey, there's the image of moving. There's the museum."
No, I was headed there, and I got lost on. I was determined to get there by the subway, and I made it.
All right, good. All right, that's number two. Where's the third place?
Well, and the third one is the Smithsonian. So if you've never been to the Smithsonian's American History Museum, they've got a handful. Of course, they have one of the original Kermit the Frogs and the original Miss Piggy. And I should also mention there's kind of this traveling exhibit that pops up here and there at certain museums around the country that also has, 15 or 20 of these characters. and again, all that you would remember if you watched that show. But I think it's really neat to see this stuff. And again, it's just nostalgia, right? It reminds you of your childhood. And the Muppets are kind of starting to make a comeback again. Disney bought them, and they kind of didn't know what to do with them. But so if you follow entertainment a little bit, Disney they're rebranding their. For example, the Rock and Roller Coaster at Disney World and I guess Disneyland also. They're getting rid of Aerosmith and putting in the Muppets, so they'll be there. And I've heard there's maybe a new Muppet show on the horizon. So yeah, it's kind of cool for those of us that grew up in the '80s that watch this stuff.
A couple years ago, I think it might have even been during COVID, there was a documentary on television that I stumbled across about the history of Sesame Street. And I thought it was going to be a puff piece and just sort of a walk down memory lane. It was riveting, and they had a whole segment on. Do you remember the Muppet Roosevelt Franklin? Remember him?
Oh, sure, yeah,
yeah. Roosevelt Franklin, Elementary School. Remember that guy? So he was he was a black Muppet, I guess, African American Muppet, and they went into in this documentary about the angst they had with this black Muppet that was an inner city, struggling, poor African-American Muppet who went to this sort of inner city school. And they decided as a organization to take this Muppet out of the rotation because it was too stereotypical, and they didn't want to propagate the stereotype of a poor African-American kid going to an inner-city school. And then they switched to, like, famous black comedians of today saying, I was heartbroken when they took Roosevelt Franklin off of the screen because I was a poor black inner-city kid going to an inner-city school, and he represented me. And so they took it away because they thought they were doing cultural harm, and it turned out by taking it away, they were doing cultural harm. It was a fascinating conversation about the Muppet Roosevelt Franklin from the 1970s on Sesame Street.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's all relatable, right? So, for me, I loved Kermit the Frog when I remember, 5, 6 years old, whatever. And that to me was someone or a character that I latched onto. And because of, Kermit the Frog and doing shows and being an MC and things like that, that got me interested in doing essentially what I'm doing now. And so, I can totally understand how people could latch on to a particular character. For me, it wasn't, necessarily cultural.
Right.
No cultural ties, but I will tell you, one of the people sometimes, they'll say, do you have any regrets in life? I don't have many. Here's one that I have. I wrote a letter to Carol Spinney. Do you know who Carol Spinney was?
No idea.
Carol Spinney played Big Bird on Sesame Street forever, like since it started, and he passed away. I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago. It's been a while. And I wrote a letter, and I just said, you know what? Is there any chance that I could visit Sesame Street? And it's one of these things like, hey, you can ask. They're probably going to tell you no. Why not? And to his credit, he sent me a letter back. This was, I guess, email was around, but people were still writing letters, if you remember letters. And he wrote me a letter back, and it was really nice. And he said, thanks for reaching out. And he said, yeah, absolutely, you can visit. And he said, reach out to me again. I can't remember what the month would have been when we start taping. And yeah, we would. McGraw, I never wrote him back. And I regret this to this day. I could have gone to Sesame Street, McGraw.
You could have gone to the street. How old were you when you wrote this letter? 42?
Yeah, last year. I don't know, in my 30s, but what the heck? I have a long history of just I ask for things, and most of the time people say no, but occasionally people surprise you and say yes, and you don't know till you ask.
That's a great story. I was a Oscar the Grouch guy. I loved Oscar the Grouch. And
hey, he's there in the museum in Atlanta. Oscar the Grouch is there.
And then as I was getting just a little bit older, they introduced Snuffleupagus. And years later, I don't know how true this is, but years later I had a friend who worked at Channel 9 or PBS or the Children's Television Network, whatever was the organization. And they told me that the reason why they introduced Snuffleupagus was because they wanted, remember, it was Big Bird's imaginary friend. And they wanted children to tell their parents about their imaginary friends, because just in case there was somebody abusing the child and said, don't tell mommy about your friend. Well, they wanted the children to tell. And so that's why Big Bird kept telling, Mr. Grover and all the others about his imaginary friend Snuffleupagus to encourage young children to tell their parents about their quote unquote imaginary friends. So I mean, there was a lot going on with Sesame Street that clearly we didn't realize.
Yeah, these shows, and one day we'll have to do a segment on Mr. Rogers, because I went to his hometown and got to go into the archives and see all the stuff from that. That's a whole other thing. But very similar to his program, you have these educators, you have these people who are really doing deep dives on these topics, and very smart people who are trying to convey to children in a way that
they can understand.
Grown adults can't do. Exactly.
Yeah. Whether it's the death of a parent or growing up with a handicap or a disability, it's really very fascinating, and God love them, right? Because oftentimes these are the kids, right? Kids oftentimes are raised by the television, and this is the only sort of parenting they get. Bill on the Road, taking us down the Muppets and a little history lane. BillOnTheRoad.com. Do you have any book signings? I got about 30 seconds. Any book signings we should know about?
No, I'm taking the week off, man.
All right, good. By the way, you should listen to last night's show. We had Tom Janot on. He wrote the Esquire magazine that the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood movie was based on. He was on last night.
Tom Hanks.
Yeah. He was talking about the article last night. So download the podcast and get a load of the interview last night. That's Bill on the Road. BillOnTheRoad.com. Every Thursday. Bill, blink your eyes. It will be next Thursday. Until then, keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars. Thanks, man.
Okay, see you later.
Bill Cleveland, ladies and gentlemen, the website, BillOnTheRoad.com. America at Night. Back in a moment.
Live from coast to coast, this is